this happened for me out of necessity because I had, by most rights, comparably compared to what most people have done, I had a beautiful childhood. But my father had a particular trait in which I could say something one day, like, for example, he was playing ping pong. I was 4 years old, 4 years old. He was playing ping pong. He took a stroke, hit off the top of his paddle, and just shot across the room. He was going for like a forehand smash, shot across the room, hit the corner of the wall. And I was just passing through, and I go, home run, and kept walking. 2 days later, he corners me, throws me down in the corner of the room and says, how dare you humiliate me in front of my competition? I can't believe you said that, threw me off my game. That was, you blah, blah, blah. And I was like, holy shit. I'd forgotten about even saying that. I'd forgotten about how that could have possibly been perceived. And I'm this little kid. And
it's actually a pretty good joke.
Yeah.
I mean,
right?
For a 4-year-old, it's a pretty good joke.
It wasn't bad.
It
wasn't bad. Home run. I don't know.
Yeah.
It made sense to me.
Yeah.
And so anyways, that and that would happen repeatedly where it wouldn't even be immediate. It would be like delayed, like it would fester and it grew.
Interesting.
And so he would come at me later.
That means you were touching on a complex.
Yes, for sure.
Something was under there causing all sorts of trouble.
All sorts of trouble. And he worked, to my dad's credit, he knew he had issues and he worked very hard on those. He just couldn't get himself completely out of the maze.
Oh yeah, when someone does that to you a few times, there's something in there that needs to be fought through for like about a month. Deep. Like horrible month.
Deep. And he fought and he fought hard. But the effect of that gave me this intense judge of everything I said. So I fractured myself into two parts. And everything I say, I have this watcher of everything. How could this be perceived? And then it splinters into a million different possibilities. Could this be perceived as an insult? Could this be perceived as a slight? Is this joke like this? Which in some regards has made me a very effective communicator. And it's almost one of my superpowers. So that moment of trauma created this superpower of really being able to understand how my words can be communicated. But
did that make you more careful with your words?
1,000%. So hyper careful with my words. But it also created this watcher that is always watching and always judging what I do, which is a source of suffering because I felt like it's very difficult for me to get fully engaged in anything because I'm always keeping some part of me that's judging everything that I'm saying. So this fracture of self is a sort of sense of suffering.
Are there times when that goes away?
Yes. And those are the things that I've sought most in my life. Those are the solutions. And that's any type of flow state. So that was basketball for me. When I was playing basketball, the watcher went away until after the game when the watcher would come back hard and tell me how bad I sucked and whatever, the judge would judge me there. But when I was playing or when I'm making love or when I'm playing music so I've spent a lot of my life finding the ways to unify that. And I'm curious for you, it's obviously a very useful thing to have that watcher and have that observer. But do you see a point where that watcher and the self kind of comes back together and you've almost like taken that wisdom and ingrained it so you no longer need that separation?
Well, it's funny. I think that is well laid out in the story of Pinocchio, in the Disney story, which is a very strange and complicated story. Not least because it draws an analogy between a cricket and Christ, which is cricket, Jesus Christ, and the conscience. They're all the same thing, which is very, very, very strange. But the cricket in Jiminy Cricket is obvious, or in Pinocchio is obviously, a higher entity in some sense because it's the conscience, so it's the judge. But the movie is very interesting because it presents that as flawed. Like as Pinocchio stops being a puppet, his conscience stops being a sort of wandering tramp, right? They both hone themselves. And at the very end, Pinocchio turns into a real boy, but the conscience turns into something that is akin to the stars, right? He gets a gold star. And so, I spent a lot of time thinking about that. It's like, well, what the hell is that? What's going on there exactly? And what it is that judge that you're talking about, and I wrote a little bit about this in 12 Rules, that judge that you have internally, which is, let's call it the voice of conscience, it suffers from a certain generic quality. So it's judging you in a cliched manner. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's cliched. It's not fully informed. And so what you want to do throughout your life is have a dialogue with that because it needs to learn just like what it's judging needs to learn. And maybe if that dialogue it's not that much different than having a relationship, like a long-term relationship, like a marriage, because you're continually communicating with any luck and you're modifying each other in the communication.
Yeah.
And you have that judge, which you need because it makes you alert and makes you watchful and
Sure.
makes you consider your actions. But it isn't God, that internal voice. It doesn't know everything, so it needs to learn too. And so I think it's reasonable to engage it in dialogue and to find out, and not to make the instantaneous assumption that just because the judge says that what you're doing is wrong, that it's absolutely correct in its judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to fight back and say, no, I'm going to defend myself against that internal voice. Not, I'm not going to listen to it because it might be right. It might be right. You want to listen, but it needs to learn too. And so you can get that dialogue going. And then I think that you can get that union across time.
Because then there's harmony. And I think that's a brilliant way to think about it, because I think you can externalize and think that the judge is useful but bad. But then if the judge is learning constantly and evolving and ascending as you are as well, then those parts of you can be in this sort of harmony, because there isn't just one self. There's multiple selves. There always will be multiple aspects of the self.
Even thinking is a multiplicity of selves, right? Because if you really think about something, basically what you do is you split yourself into at least 2 avatars, maybe 3, who knows, it depends on your capacity, and each of them adopts a position and argues. I mean, that's what thought is. It's you divide yourself into 2 hypothetical entities and let them fight it out, and then you side with the victor. But it's definitely the case. So it's definitely the case that we have a multiplicity of selves. And if we didn't, we wouldn't be as flexible as we are. Because really what you're doing when you're thinking, apart from splitting yourself into a multiplicity of selves, is you're splitting yourself into a multiplicity of selves, many of which you're going to allow to die so that you don't have to, right? So you have an idea and you play it out in your imagination. It's like a video game in a sense. That's why we like video games. But you play it out in your imagination. And if, when you play it out, the consequence is not what you want, then you just kill that thing off. Then you don't have to die. So that was Alfred North Whitehead. He said, the purpose of thinking is so that our thoughts die instead of us. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's a very nice Darwinian take on it, because what happens in animals is that animals can't really think. I mean, they can a bit, but not like us. So the way animals adapt to the universe is they produce a bunch of baby animals and most of them die. Yeah. And human beings do that too. But we also produce avatars of ourselves, and then we launch them in a fictional universe, and all the ones that don't manage it die. But we don't have to. We can identify with the ones that stay alive.
Almost like